Today, I'm gonna do something a little crazy. Hi all, I'm Ezrado and you're watching my travel channel where I talk all things Colombia. So I assume if you're watching this video, you've either seen or are interested in seeing Disney's Encanto. It's an amazing love letter to Colombia filled to the brim with cultural references, many of which are some very specific deep cuts that only Colombians would pick up on. Today though, that's all about to change as I'm going to do an almost frame by frame analysis of this movie to share with you all every single Colombian detail I can find, whether it's the cultural meaning behind a flower, architectural construction techniques, characters' idiosyncrasies, or a bunch of blink and you'll miss background details. This is every Colombian detail in Encanto. Now, I must say there have been a handful of YouTube videos discussing some of the cultural references to Colombia in the movie, but I really wanted to go deep in this and make it the most comprehensive analysis out there, so this will be a long video. If you're along for the ride though, I think you'll learn quite a bit. One last thing before I start, I just wanted to give a massive thank you to my Colombian friends who spent hours sitting with me and scouring every last screenshot. As I said before, there are cultural references in this movie that you just wouldn't pick up on unless you're Colombian, so I'm very grateful for all the help I got. Also got to shout out the official art book and the Blu-ray's bonus features, as there were a handful of cultural tidbits in those as well that I would have otherwise missed. Anyway, that's more than enough preamble, let's begin. Alright, so start of the movie, right away we get a shot with Mirabel and Abuela, and what you'll notice here is that Mirabel has some butterfly patterns stringed along her outfit. You'll see the butterfly appear a lot in the movie, and it's basically a reference to the famous Colombian writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who used butterflies as a recurring symbol in his most recognized work, 100 Years of Solitude. Thanks to the book's huge legacy, the butterflies have sort of become like an unofficial symbol of Colombia, which is why you'll see it pop up so much here. I should also say that Mirabel's blouse itself is, as you'd expect, a very traditional outfit. You'll often see that circular ruffle around the shoulders in many traditional costumes, along with a lot of lacing. One more thing, although you can't tell from the screenshot, the opening line of the movie, Abre los ojos, literally translates to open your eyes in Spanish, which Abuela helpfully translates for us immediately after. In the next shot, we get our first look at the candle, which is significant in Colombia for a number of reasons. Being a very Catholic country, the candle can be seen as a symbol of faith, but also as a symbol of family and hope, which makes it very fitting that the Madrigal's miracle comes from the candle. And yeah, already another Marquez reference with the butterfly there. Beyond symbolism though, candles also have many use cases in Colombia. They're obviously often used in cathedrals and churches, but they can also be a popular means of lighting houses in certain scenarios to this day. They even have a festival called Dia de las Velitas, which literally means Day of the Little Candles. In this flashback shot, we see Abuela's now deceased husband, Pedro. I wanted to point out that the button-up shirt he's wearing is something that's very common to this day for guys. In countries like my own, we think of buttoned-up collared shirts as something formal and only really worn casually by older generations. In Colombia though, this is a very popular casual outfit for guys. You'll see it everywhere. Okay, this next shot is alluding to a sad truth about Colombia's history of displacements, where families flee their villages in search of a new home due to civil unrest. This flashback takes place during a specific period in Colombian history known as the Thousand Days War, which was a civil war between rival political parties during the turn of the 20th century. There have been several civil wars in Colombia throughout history, but the movie's official art books seem to confirm that the movie takes place sometime around the year 1900, which would line up with this war in particular. On a lighter note, the location here appears to be inspired by Caño Cristales, which is a colourful river in the department of Meta. Here you can see its iconic red colour, which is caused by plants in the water, but it can also be yellow, blue, black and green throughout different months of the year. As we can see, Pedro here is giving himself up for his family and village, something which many fathers were known to do for their families during these displacements. It's unclear exactly which side of the political fight these horsemen are on. I think Disney left it purposefully ambiguous, as to be honest, it's neither here nor there. The reality is that belligerent people on both sides raided villages and threatened those who didn't join them, and so the point of this in the movie is really to highlight the displacement itself, not to make any political statement, which I think was the right move. I also can't help but wonder whether or not the horsemen here are a reference to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, who are part of the apocalyptic scripture of Revelation. I mean, I realize that it was typical for these villages to be raided by horseback men, but at the same time, the way this is framed, it sort of feels like it could be a visual symbol. Anyway, in this next shot, we get a beautiful look at the broader landscape, which is heavily inspired by the Cocora Valley, as evidenced by the iconic wax palms that grow in the area, and this has also been confirmed in multiple places by the filmmakers. Geographically, this should actually be in Quindío, which is an entirely different department to Meta, where the Caño Cristales River is, so yeah, Disney have clearly taken some creative liberties by putting them in the same area, I guess for the sake of cramming as much of Colombia into the movie as they can without characters needing to travel too far. Getting back to Abuela here though, it's worth mentioning that single motherhood is actually quite common in Colombia, although usually it's not due to divorce, but rather having kids outside of wedlock. Obviously for Abuela, this is a result of her husband's sacrifice, but still, her single motherhood is in line with the experiences of many Colombian women. This obviously also places Abuela as the matriarch of the family, which again is very true to life. Even with spouses that are together in Colombia, it's quite common for the mother to play the central role in raising the family a lot more than the father. I should also probably note the word abuela means grandmother, in case you didn't already know. Next up, we see the dawn of the Madrigal miracle emerging from the candle. This is very symbolic for a number of reasons. I already mentioned before about candles being a symbol of hope, so again, it makes thematic sense that the miracle would emerge from one. Beyond that though, I should mention that the movie takes a lot of influences from not just Gabriel Garcia Marquez's books themselves, but also their literary genre, magical realism. If you don't know what that is, I've done a video on it which I put a link for in the description. Essentially though, the idea of magic or miracle emerging from a place of pain is a common trope in this genre, and we see this here too, as the miracle emerges just after Pedro sacrificed himself. Not to mention that the candle itself was the one Pedro was using as a light source to navigate through the jungle before giving it to Abuela, so we have this very literal symbol that Pedro's sacrifice directly gave way to the miracle here. One more thing in this frame you'll notice is the flower pattern, which is another symbol along with the butterfly that appears quite a bit in the movie. This is likely a specific type of lotus known as the Victoria Regia, which can be found in the department of Las Amazonas. Now we have a shot of the entire house, which is very colonial in its design. The roof, for instance, is made up of ceramic tiles called tejas, which are made of mud and can be seen on colonial buildings everywhere in Colombia. Then we have the classic Venetian windows and balconies as well, all of which is of course very colourful. Architecturally, it appears to be constructed using piedra and tierra, or stone and earth, materials also very popular in colonial times. By the way, the term they use to refer to this house in the movie, casita, literally translates to little house, which may seem ironic given that it's clearly the complete opposite of little. However, the practice of adding an ita or ito to the end of a word is also a means of endearment in Spanish, as they don't always mean little in a literal sense. Okay, so subtle change you mightn't have noticed here is that Abuela's now wearing a black shawl. As you may or may not know, wearing black for a period of time after the death of a loved one has been a tradition in many countries, including Colombia. Speaking of clothes, I already mentioned Mirabel's blouse, which is of a similar style on Julieta and Pepa here, but Bruno's outfit appears to be what's known as a ruana, which is sort of like a Colombian type of poncho. In this shot, we can see some coffee plantation in the foreground, which is common in a lot of departments, but especially here, as if the movie's set in the Cocora Valley, that would place it in the coffee axis, a region known for its coffee cultivations. This next screen has quite a lot going on. The rocking chair here, for example, is something that's very popular on the coast and in areas with warmer climates, particularly on the balconies of houses. We get some more butterflies, this time hanging from the ceiling and on the wallpaper, along with a rug that appears to have the pattern of the lotus that I mentioned earlier. Then there's a guitar by the bedside, a common instrument in a lot of traditional Colombian music, as you might guess, and Mirabel's shoes you see on the ground are actually a specific type of Colombian shoe known as alpargatas. Finally, you'll notice that the room is being lit by candles, and you mightn't think anything of this at first, but if you remember what I said before about the movie being set around the turn of the 20th century, you realize that light bulbs had indeed been invented by this point, so why the candles then? Well, it partly goes back to what I was saying before about the trend of candles sometimes being chosen to light houses in Colombia in certain instances. This was probably even more common in the early 1900s, especially for remote villages like this one. Anyway, now we have the all-important title card, so let's talk about the meaning of this title for a bit. If you type ENCANTO into Google Translate, it'll translate it to the word charm in English. Whilst technically correct, there is a lot more behind this word that Google Translate would let on. Another translation that's perhaps more apt for the film is the word enchantment. More specifically, Colombian folk stories often tell of pockets of enchanted areas amidst nature known as encantos, which of course is exactly how the hidden village in this film could be described. Encanto is also the past tense form of the word love, so yeah, a lot of interpretations there. Alright, that's us up for the prologue. Moving on to the present day, this Singer treadle sewing machine you see here was hugely popular in Colombia, and sewing and knitting in general is an extremely common practice among mothers, aunts, grandmothers, and yes, sometimes even young people across Colombia to this day. We can see here that Mirabel's sewn what's known as a pollera, a skirt with colourful embroidery found all across Latin America. In this frame, you can see one of the embroideries appears to be a toucan, a bird found in several regions of Colombia. Here's a quick shot of another pair of alpargatas shoes, as I mentioned before, and then here you'll notice a handmade Colombian map on the door of the wardrobe, in case there was any doubt where the movie was set. And on the top shelf, there's a hat made of straw, a very popular material for a variety of hats in the country, and this one specifically looks like the straw hats you see in the department of Huila. Finally, we get a look at the iconic mochila. You may have seen this before, but this is a type of embroidered bag traditionally made by the Wayu people in the department of La Guajira. You'll find them being sold all across Colombia, but if you want some extra significance, I'd recommend buying one directly from the Wayu people, who you'll find selling their wares along the beach of Rio Hacha. In this shot, I just wanted to point out that it's quite common to have flowers around colonial houses, and the pink bougainvillea flowers you see here are specifically common in Colombia's coastal regions. Another coffee reference here, worth pointing out that it's also common for kids to drink coffee in Colombia, which is a fact that probably inspired this character. These plants you see here are known as heliconias or lobster claws, mostly native to the tropical regions of the Americas, including Colombia. In the background of this shot, we can see a church, which are often the most prominent buildings in colonial villages. On the shelves here is some kitchenware that's of an iconic Colombian style known as la chamba. They're essentially handmade out of clay, and whilst they're usually crafted in Colombia, you'll find them being sold all over the world. A couple of things in the background of this one. First of all, you'll notice the cluster of bananas, which has historically been a popular fruit to cultivate in Colombia. Once again, if you've read Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, you'll know what I'm talking about. These actually appear to be a smaller type of banana known as bocadillos, which are very popular. Then over here we have a clay maquette of the Madrigal household, something that's very common to use in the design process of many buildings and art sculptures in the country. Finally, yes, even more butterflies, this time all over Mirabel's blouse. Now this next one could be a stretch, but this whole focus on the different generations of the Madrigal family is, once again, really giving me 100 Years of Solitude vibes. For those who don't know, the plot of that book focused on the generations of a Colombian family spanning a century, and although Encanto doesn't have a time span like that, it actually did in some earlier stages of development, so I kind of feel like this focus on a multi-generational family is a remnant of that previous idea. Whatever the case, it should be noted too that multi-generational homes can be quite common in Colombia, so it's possible this was just inspired by that. Alright, now we're getting into the first song of the movie, The Family Madrigal, and although I'm not going to play it because I don't want this video to get copyright claimed, I will say that it's of a style that you'll hear a lot of on the Caribbean coast called vallenato. If you ever hear a song that's heavily accordion driven in Colombia, there's a good chance this is what it is, as the accordion is really the most prominent instrument in this genre. Getting back to the screenshot though, obviously we see this lotus pattern again on the ground, but I also wanted to point out the hammocks in the background here, which are also very popular in the coastal regions. In this one, I gotta say that the pot plants hanging from the ceiling remind me a lot of Cartagena, as you'll see that a lot over there. Also having a courtyard that's in the center of the house and is symmetrical with rooms that border it is of a very traditional, grandiose architectural style in Colombia. So I haven't got a lot visually to say about this next shot other than the fact that, yeah, roses are a thing in Colombia, surprise, surprise. But what I really wanted to mention was Isabella herself here. See, her whole character was likely inspired by the fact that in many Colombian families, particularly those with multiple sisters, it's common for one of them to have this kind of the world revolves around me dynamic. Now, please, before anyone gets mad, I must stress that I'm not saying that this is every Colombian woman, far from it, just that there often can be that one sister who's a bit of a princess. This wasn't even my own observation, by the way, but actually something one of my Colombian friends told me, so I trust her word on that. As far as my own observation though, I'm yet again reminded of 100 Years of Solitude, and specifically a character from that book, Remedios the Beauty, who sort of had this same archetype as the pretty and perfect sister, but I don't know, maybe that was just inspired by an existing cultural phenomena. On to Luisa here, she's also wearing a very traditional skirt with the embroidery lined along the bottom, and the blooms underneath it were also very reminiscent of Andean fashion at this point in history. Yet another coffee reference here, obviously, but we also see some arepas on the left, and this is a very classic combo for morning tea, particularly in the coffee axis. Here we have our first look at the family together, so a few things to mention fashion-wise. Firstly, the colours you see on Dolores and Camilo's outfits you'll notice are of a warm orangey yellow tone, and this is to reflect the fact that their lineage is partly from the Caribbean coast. Dolores specifically is wearing a blouse and skirt apparently inspired by the cumbia dress, and Camilo of course is sporting a poncho along with the classic button shirt I mentioned earlier. In regards to the flower around Abuela's shoulders, this looks to be the same lotus once again, and then with Isabella, the embroidery around her neckline depict Christmas orchids, which is the national flower of Colombia, and she's also wearing a real one in her hair. Finally, these things hanging from Mirabel's dress are known as borlas, which are fluffy ornaments traditionally crafted by the Wayu people in La Guajira and are often seen on their mochila bags that I described earlier. Some more confirmation that this is set in Colombia with a literal sign on the house here. This reminds me a little bit of how every city and even a lot of towns in Colombia have their name in 3D letter blocks placed somewhere for photo ops. I guess Disney didn't want to reveal the name of this village though, so they just went with a country name instead. Next we see some roasted corn, which is a very popular way of eating it in Colombia. Now this hat here is very iconic. You may have seen it before, but it's known as the vuelteado from the Zenu indigenous community, and it might just be the most famous hat in the country. I'll be honest, I'm not sure if this is a poncho or a ruana. I mean, ruanas are usually made of wool, but it's a little hard to tell what the exact material on this one is. Anyway, as for Julieta, she served up a bunch of Colombian/Latin American food here. First of all, we of course have the arepa, but also next to that are some empanadas, and then she's holding a bowl of buñuelos, which might just be my favorite food in Colombia. They're a sort of fritter that's slightly sweet, slightly savory, and popular around Christmas time. We also have some herbs here on the table, which are often seen in this uncut form in many Colombian households. I will say too, this act of healing people with home-cooked food is a very common practice among mothers in Colombia. Just a quick thing in this one, the donkey in the background here has historically been a means of transport in certain regions of Colombia, particularly rugged, mountainous areas. Obviously, this is less common today with better infrastructure and, a little thing called cars, but when they're used, they're often a means of transporting produce and various farm equipment. Once again, we see a church here, which, as you can tell, is very much a focal point of the town, given its size. There's another hat you'll notice in the background here, which looks a lot like a Panama hat, but it's actually a Colombian hat known as an aguadeño from the Aguadas community. Now, in this one, I just wanted to talk about the village itself, which is very clearly inspired by the town of Barichara in Santander, with the cobblestone streets, colonial architecture, and especially the hilly roads like this. Unlike the whitewashed buildings in that town though, here the buildings are a lot more colourful and take inspiration from the town of Salento, which is actually close to the aforementioned Cocora Valley in real life. Felix here is wearing a guayabera, and the colours of his outfit clearly reflect his Caribbean heritage. While I'm on that, this is also probably a good time to mention that you'll notice the large variety of skin tones in this movie, which is very accurate to Colombia in real life. Augustin on the left here, for instance, is meant to be from a more corporate city like Bogota, as reflected in his more formal, business-like outfit, and true to many real-life Bogotanos, he has a much lighter complexion compared to Felix, who's from the Caribbean, where people commonly have darker skin tones. Alright, we get our first look at Pepper's outfit here, which is apparently a combination of folkloric dresses from several regions such as Tolima, and you'll notice once again the yellow tones to reflect the fact that she's Felix's wife. As for Antonio, his outfit was apparently inspired by clothes on the Caribbean coast specifically, such as the red handkerchief. Now this shot gives us an interesting glimpse on how the houses of the villagers are constructed, and we can see that the construction materials are once again stone and mud, just as I mentioned earlier. There's also another technique going on in the background here though, where bamboo is being used as frames. This is a popular material in a construction style known as bajareque. Up next, we have a very clear reference to Medellin's Festival de las Flores, where people parade the streets with these frames of flowers known as ciateras. This is an annual holiday in August to celebrate the independence of Medellin's department, Antioquia. Getting into some speculation here, but I do think having a mural like this on a building was inspired by the murals you'll see in certain Colombian towns like Aracataca. It's also worth noting that Bogota is highly known for its graffiti art and murals, so who knows, maybe this was inspired by that. This outfit you see Antonio wearing here is known as a Liki Liki suit, which is actually the national suit of Venezuela, but sometimes worn in Colombia for certain occasions as well. Here we get a clear reference to the genre of the song that's playing in this sequence. As I said before, this is vallenato, which is very accordion driven, as you can see here. Another butterfly on the accordion here. The crops we see here are corn plants, which are very commonly grown in several regions of Colombia, especially in the central departments like where this movie's set. This one's a cool little reference to a popular game in Colombia known as Tejo, where the aim is to throw steel discs into small rings containing gunpowder, exploding on impact. Obviously, Mirabel's trying to get out of the way of that here. You'll also notice that the men playing have some beers on the ground. It's actually quite common for this sport to be found in bars, and for that reason, you'll often see people with drinks on the side like this. Finally, something a little more obvious, but the colours of the posts here are clearly the colours of Colombia's national flag. Here we see Abuela holding a vase, which is very popular in many households of Colombia. Obviously this exists all over the world, but I'd say they're especially culturally significant in Colombia, where they're handmade by local artisans. Alright, now this frame right here is loaded with cultural references due to all the stuff that's in the basket. In fact, just the act of putting a bunch of goodies in a basket like this is very Colombian. I've seen this a bit myself actually when I've stayed at some Airbnbs, and there'll be a basket full of sweets and snacks in the kitchen, as it's common to give these as a gift. As for the stuff that's in the basket, we have panela, which is a cane sugar found across Latin and Central America, archiras, which are savory biscuits from the department of Huila, some bags of coffee, some yuca, which are roots of the cassava plant. People often bake them into fries like you would with potatoes. Then we have a cocoa bean, rengletes, which are these paper windmills you've probably seen before, but they're especially popular among kids in Colombia. These are handmade boles de lana, or woolen bowls. This is a jar of what my Colombian friends and I think are yo-yos, but it's a little hard to tell. And then there are these small baskets known as canastos de fique and some party hats. Lastly, if we go to the next screenshot, we can also see some melcochas, a hard candy found all across the continent. So I know that wasn't everything in the basket, but that was all the stuff my Colombian friends and I were able to make out at least. Let me know if you recognize any of the remaining things though. Moving on, the flowers you see here are called hortensias and can be found in several countries of the world, but in Colombia they're quite common in the department of Antioquia. Another buñuelo here that Julieta's giving Augustine, and she also has some herbs known as hierba buena, which literally translates to good herbs. In Colombia, these are generally mint plants and are often used aromatherapeutically. Speaking of plants, this one here is known as a Dracaena trifasciata and are a common household dressing. Meanwhile, these decorations you see here are sometimes used on the streets in Colombia, especially in Cartagena, and they're known in the country as banderillas, literally meaning small flags. The tiles you see in this frame are of a very Colombian style, and we also have another symbol here of the aforementioned flower from Las Amazonas and another candle. I should say too that the different colours of candles often carry their own individual meanings in Colombia, so it's likely that this pink candle for Abuela has some kind of symbolic significance. Now obviously this is the same room we saw earlier in the film, but there are a few extra things I wanted to point out. Firstly, these boxes you see next to Mirabel's bed are a type that are commonly sold at farmers markets in Colombia. Then on the wall here we see a drawing of a capybara, a popular rodent across South America, although they don't have wings like you see here. Lastly, there appears to be a wooden toucan on the box over here, which again is a common bird in Colombia. Speaking of toucans, here's another one, along with a jaguar and some more butterflies, plus some other animal that probably exists in the country as well, although I can't make it out as it's covered by this wool, which by the way, was a common material used to wrap presents in Colombia back in the day. Another jaguar reference here, and in this one we get a look at some sparklers, which are very popular in Colombia, where they're known as chispitas mariposas, literally meaning butterfly sparkles. The act of putting candles outside houses, as you see in this shot, is a tradition during the country's Dia de las Velitas, or Day of the Little Candles that I mentioned earlier. There are also a variety of Colombian hats in this image, but I believe I labeled them all in previous screenshots, so I won't go over them again here. Some more butterflies, and what you're seeing here with this person fanning the flames of the barbecue is quite a common practice in Colombia. A lot of the time it's done with a pot lid. The corn you see over here is a special type known as mazorca, which unlike the corn here in Australia for instance, isn't actually sweet. The bowl they're drinking out of here is actually the shell of an inedible fruit in Colombia known as a totumo. Really couldn't figure out what's on this bowl, so if you recognize it, do let me know. Lastly, on the right you can see some potatoes known as papas criollas in Colombia, which are very creamy and tender. Now you can't really tell in this shot as it's just a static image, but the dance Isabella is doing here is a vallenato dance, which is the same music and dance genre I described earlier for the movie's first song, the family Madrigal. A bunch of animals native to Colombia in this shot. I've already mentioned toucans and capybaras, but here there are also some hummingbirds, and this stripy-tailed animal you see here is known as a coati. Our first look at Antonio's room here, which was inspired by the rainforest in the department of Choco, including various plantation native to the area. The bird's nest you see in this shot of Antonio's room are for a species in Colombia and several other countries known as the arendajo, or the Eurasian jay. It's a little hard to tell, but I believe the candles might be trying to imitate the shape of these nests. Meanwhile, the music in this scene, although I can't play it, is of a genre called bullerengue, which is a style from the Caribbean coast and the Darien province of Panama that incorporates a choir usually consisting of elderly women along with drums. Also, I've already mentioned the popularity of hammocks, but here they are again. Another jaguar, another hammock. This snake is probably native to Colombia, though I couldn't tell you what type it is. Alright, now we're moving into Mirabel's song, Waiting on a Miracle. This is of a traditional genre of Colombian music known as bambuco, which differs from many other traditional styles as it consists of a 3/4 time signature as opposed to the more common time signature. Shout out to any musos watching who got that joke. Anyway, in layman's terms, this makes it sound a bit like a waltz. As for the visuals in this shot, I really just wanted to point out that the fireworks are quite popular in Colombia, especially during holiday celebrations like Christmas, although they're not usually this large. Here's a shot of the aforementioned teja tile that's now fallen from the roof. Meanwhile, back in Antonio's room, we can see some bongos, a common instrument in various traditional genres. Not much to say with this one, except that wearing beads in your hair like this is common for many women on the Caribbean coast. Here we see another traditional instrument, the marimba, which I believe is made out of rosewood or mahogany, both common materials. Now you won't know just by looking at this shot, but the tune Augustin's playing on the piano here is called En Barranquilla Me Quedo, a popular salsa song from the 80s by artist Joe Arroyo. So yeah, I guess the film kind of broke out of its time period for this reference. Here we see Julieta making some arepas, and she's once again carrying some plants in her pocket, this time sunflowers, which are also commonly used for medicinal purposes in Colombia. A couple more coatis here, and the fruit we see Augustin holding is a pitaya, which exists in several Latin American countries, but I believe its yellow colour is unique to Colombia as they're usually pink. Now we get a look at a whole table of food for breakfast, including what I believe are either buñuelos or perhaps pan de yuca, which is a popular cheesy bread with several variations across various Latin American countries. Then there are some arepas, bananas, empanadas, pitaya, papaya, which is another popular fruit in Colombia, and finally huevos pericos, which is a dish traditionally consisting of scrambled eggs, onions, tomatoes, bell peppers, and butter, common in both Colombia and Venezuela. We see in this one a traditional coffee grinder known as a molino in Colombia, then of course some bags full of coffee beans which need to sit out in the sun to dry for about 15 minutes before being grounded. Some more coatis here, and now we get a look at some traditional breakfast drinks, including what is most likely coffee here, along with orange juice, which might seem pretty standard worldwide, but it's worth noting that in Colombia, juice is especially popular. If you go to a restaurant or cafe, they often actually give you the option of having the given juice's fruit mixed with water or with milk. Having it with water is similar to what you're probably used to, but having it with milk makes it more like a milkshake, albeit not as creamy since they don't usually include ice cream. Now, I've already mentioned the food that's being served here, so moving on. We now see that they got some brown sugar, which can be very common to put in coffee in Colombia. Then in the background, the stick in the jug here is also known as a molino, and seeing it in a jug like this likely means that the jug contains chocolate. Having a bell like this atop a building is, as I'm sure you'd imagine, extremely common among Catholic churches in Colombia. And in case there was any doubt that it was a Catholic church, we can clearly see here a Catholic priest standing outside. A bit of speculation on this one, but I feel like the fact that this house has moved to an angle like this might be a reference to the country's earthquakes. Although they're not usually severe, earthquakes aren't entirely uncommon in Colombia, and in fact in the Andean region where this film is set, there are also a group of volcanoes known as the Cordillera Central. At the time of recording this, the most active of these volcanoes, Nevado de Ruiz, is actually due for an eruption. If you want the full details on that, I actually already did a video about it which you can check out via the link in the description. More of a narrative element I noticed in this scene, but this idea of Luisa suddenly exploding and losing composure after compressing some inner frustration for a long period of time, this is something that I dare say is quite culturally authentic. I noticed this myself when in Colombia, and my Colombian friends have confirmed with me that my observations aren't baseless. Basically, it's often seen as a taboo in Colombia to complain or say what you really think when you're upset, angry, or frustrated about something. Inevitably though, all of this compression will become too much to bear and can result in an eventual outburst, like with Luisa here, after she's taken on too much responsibility. I actually already talked about this in a previous video, and when I look at this scene now, I really get the vibe that this is what they were referencing. It's all the more by Mirabel's reaction of shock here, as it's clear that she's rarely seen her sister get upset like this. Anyway, now we're getting into Luisa's song, Surface Pressure, which lyrically really encapsulates the struggle I was just talking about. Stylistically, this is the first song to really be of a modern genre, in this case reggaeton. In this shot, we once again see the coffee grinder, or molino, now grounding some coffee beans. This plant you see here is known as a frailejón, and is common at high altitudes in Colombia, like in this scene. And speaking of high altitudes, this shot's a clear reference to the Andes mountain range, which I must say looks very authentic with these densely vegetated cloud forests. The domino sequence of doors here reminds me a lot of the highly colourful houses in the town of Guatapé, although it could also be inspired by the filmmaker's visit to Salento, which also has some colourful buildings, albeit to a lesser extent than Guatapé. Nature-wise, this is obviously inspired by the Cocora Valley with these palm trees and the hills, which, as I said before, also inspired the movie's location in general. A lot of references to donkeys in this song, whose significance to Colombia I explained earlier, and then the confetti here are the colours of Colombia's national flag. Here we have the pattern of Colombia's iconic Volcano hat that I pointed out before, and in this one I thought I should mention that in many Colombian villages there can often be one house that's larger than all the others, belonging to a wealthier family like you see with the ENCANTO here, and much of the time they're the ones responsible for producing a lot of the crops. That's all from Luis's song, so in this next scene in Bruno's room, we have a reference to Los Estoraques. This is a national park in the department of Santander, which contains huge columns of brownstone formed by erosion over thousands of years. Here it's made to look like a cliffside, but in real life they're more like individual pedestals. Now this could be a stretch, but Mirabel heaving her way up these endless stairs reminds me a lot of El Peñol in Guatapé, which is a huge rock that's also famous for its many steps leading to its peak. The engravings on the wall and the pottery here are likely a reference to ancient pre-Colombian indigenous groups, who you can learn a lot about in Bogotá's Museo de Oro, or Gold Museum, I might add. Back into Mirabel's room now, and I haven't got much to add except another coffee reference with this coffee crate that Peppa's holding. Now we're getting into the film's most popular number, We Don't Talk About Bruno, which is clearly salsa in style. I really love this kind of feisty pointing notion Peppa's doing, very common across Latin America, and the shrug we see Felix making here where he's holding his palms out in front of him is actually quite typical in Colombia's Caribbean regions. Now they're obviously doing a salsa dance to match the music. Once again, the national flag colours are on display with these umbrellas here, and then decorating the church are some flower arrangements, which, as with many countries, are a popular wedding adornment in Colombia. Believe it or not, this bamboo swing isn't just a stylistic choice to match Isabella's plant powers, but is also very true to life, as bamboo is quite a common material for swings in Colombia. The vines though, not so much. Something that you can't tell from the screenshot here, but in this scene where Dolores overhears Mirabel's secret, her father Agustin reacts by cursing with the word miércoles. Now, if you've learned some Spanish, you may know that this word literally means Wednesday, so you might be confused as to why this is a curse word. Well, this is actually a euphemism for a real curse word in Spanish. The English equivalent is a certain four-letter curse word starting with S, which I won't say here, but essentially miércoles sort of sounds like this word in Spanish, albeit more appropriate for a family film. Alright, a bunch of food to point out in this one. Firstly, the soup here is known as ajiaco. Some of my Colombian friends made it for me once, so I can say from experience that it's delicious. It exists in several Latin American countries, but in Colombia it's most popular in Bogotá. The soup generally consists of corn, several types of potato, chicken, and guasca leaves, which is a common herb in the country. Outside of the soup, we have a lot of other traditional foods, such as alcaparras, or capers, chicken, rice. These bowls look like they have either parsley or coriander in them. And then for the drinks, these ones are what's known as jugo lulo. This is a popular type of homemade juice in Colombia that contains the titular Latin American lulo fruit blended with water and sugar. Finally, I wanted to point out that having wine at dinner like this is actually quite uncommon in Colombia. Really, the only time anyone would do this is for a very formal occasion. Then again, maybe that's what they were trying to indicate with this scene, since it's supposed to be Isabella and Mariano's engagement. By the way, the track in this scene is titled The Dysfunctional Tango, and whilst you might consider this an odd genre choice for the soundtrack, considering the tango is more synonymous with Argentina for many, it's also grown very popular in Colombia throughout the last century or so. A couple more food items we see in the overhead shot. Firstly, the cream you see here in Colombia is known as crema de leche, literally milk cream, and then there's also some avocado. Something really sweet, the townsfolk have come to congratulate Isabella and Mariano in their supposed engagement, with this sign translating to congratulations. Another coffee reference in this painting here, and now Mirabel's chasing after Bruno behind the walls, which gives us a look at some construction technique. I described this for one of the houses earlier in the video, but this technique where bamboo and mud is used in the inner wall structure is known as bajareque. Bruno's shoe here has that same vuelteado pattern we've seen a bit already, and is a type of shoe known as a calle chancla, which is popular on Colombia's Caribbean coast. It's made of a palm called caña flecha, or arrow cane, also found in the country's northern regions. We can see Bruno picking some salt here just before he throws it over his shoulder, which is a superstitious ritual in certain sects of Catholicism, done to supposedly avoid bad luck. Speaking of which, another practice that some Colombians observe is this act of putting a broom against a door, which is supposed to prevent people from entering. I'm not referring to the weight of the broom preventing the door from being open, obviously that wouldn't work, but I mean the idea of there being a broom there, like from a superstitious perspective, supposedly prevents people from entering. This cutout is a reference to Colombia's win against Germany in the 1990 FIFA World Cup, and in the background you'll notice this mascot over here, who's actually just one guy known as El Cole. He's famously been spotted at many soccer games across the country for decades. This cutout, on the other hand, is likely a reference to the Colombian telenovela La Caponera. Another reference to the country's love of soccer here, along with coffee. Here we have another animal you'll find in Colombia and many parts of Latin America, the tapa. Here's yet another butterfly. As a country with huge diversity in its biomes, you'll also find, in contrast to the mountainous regions I've been discussing, some warmer, more barren areas where cacti can be found, such as around Santander's Chicamocha Canyon. Getting into Isabella's song now, What Else Can I Do, which was inspired by the Latin American rock movement of the 90s. There are obviously a lot of plants in this song, which I'll be honest, as someone who's not a Colombian horticulturalist, I'm not going to be able to label in their entirety. I will point out these hortensias on the ground though, which is one of the flowers I described earlier. On the end of the vine here is a lotus that can be found in the department of Las Amazonas. Like the cactus from before, here's another plant that grows in the desert and drier biomes, the aloe vera plant, known in Colombia as the sabila. I just wanted to note, by the way, that these are not natural plant colors, in case that wasn't obvious. They're just taking a bit of creative license for the sake of the song's thematic elements. As I described earlier, some of these shrubs are what's known in Colombia as frailejones, which can be found at high altitudes. Then we also have the fique plant, common to Andean regions and used as a common source as fiber for ethnic products. Here are some more coffee beans flying out from this jar, and plant-wise there are a bunch I've already mentioned, including the Dracaena trifasciata from earlier in the film. Moving on from Isabella's song now, this might be another reference to the country's history of earthquakes, although they're rarely this severe. Some more coffee plants in the background. Now this shot in Abuela's flashback is without a shadow of a doubt inspired by the town of Barichara. I know I said that the film's main village is as well, but this would be even more so, as you'll notice the whitewashed buildings here, which are very true to real life. When you add to that the hilly cobblestone streets, this honestly feels like an almost one-to-one recreation. Also, I feel like it's becoming redundant to mention it at this point, but yeah, more butterflies. One more thing to note here is that the folk-style song that's playing in this scene is called Dos Oruguitas, which translates to Two Little Caterpillars, and it's sung by Colombian pop singer Sebastián Yatra. I know I just said 2 sentences ago that it's becoming redundant to mention butterflies, but the whole theme of this song is, yes, butterflies. The lyrics are essentially a metaphor for Abuela and Pedro's relationship here. I've described a lot already the significance of candles in Colombia, and this thing of everyone holding candles like this may be a reference to the aforementioned Dia de las Velitas, if not some other festival. Another possibility is that it's around Christmas time, since they're eating what I believe are buñuelos, which are a popular Christmas snack. Yet another candle here, and although it isn't exactly a tradition to hold one during a wedding ceremony, there is the meaning it contains I previously mentioned of family and hope, which makes this an appropriate symbol. Both papercraft and the woolen artisanal cuadro we see on the wall here are common in Colombia. I already discussed the Thousand Days War and the displacements that have occurred throughout history in Colombia at the beginning of the video, so I won't go over it again here beyond saying that this is what this frame's referencing. The machete you see here was commonly used as a weapon by these belligerent forces at this point in time. Most of the displacements occurred in regional and rural villages, as that was where many of these forces emerged from. For that reason, they'd often brandish equipment from these areas, including the machete, which was typically used to cut through shrub. Moving on from that though, here's a really beautiful shot of Caño Cristales along with some yellow butterflies, which were used by Gabriel Garcia Marquez as a symbol of love and hope, obviously very fitting for this scene. Some more cacti and fique here, along with some papaya fruit in this bowl. You'll also notice the stones being used for construction, which is a popular colonial technique as described earlier. And that's it. No, I'm kidding, now we got the credits, which also have a surprising amount of cultural references, starting with this one here with the capybara in the bathtub. I also wanted to point out the flamingos on the wallpaper here, which you can find in the department of La Guajira, not far from Rio Hacha. I actually did a boat tour there to see them in their natural habitat, which I definitely recommend. The music playing during the credits here, by the way, is called Colombia Mi Encanto, which translates to Colombia My Love, and is sung by famous Colombian singer Carlos Vives. Stylistically, it draws from the genre of vallenato, just like the film's opening track, The Family Madrigal. Here's some more of the food we saw before, including arepas and capers, along with the ajiaco soup and some kind of herbs. Here we have some references to the traditional fashion of various departments. I believe the top left is a reference to Huila, the top right Antioquia, the bottom left is a reference to the Palanquera women, who you'll often see in Bolivar, specifically in Cartagena. Then the bottom right I believe is a reference to the traditional fashion of Santander. Next up we have a woman of the Wayu people in the top left, who you'll find in the department of La Guajira, and I believe this is another Wayu woman in the top right. As for the masks here, these are often worn during the annual Carnaval de Barranquilla. The statue you see here is one of the World Heritage megalithic sculptures found in the National Park of San Agustin in the department of Huila. A bit of fruit found in Colombia here, including the chontaduro, dragon fruit, and pitaya. Getting into some fauna now with this toucan, some parrots and a jaguar, and then a couple of monkeys and butterflies along with what I believe is a spectacled bear from the Andes. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that. Here we have some hummingbirds along with a condor, which you'll find in the Andes. Now for some flora, so this is an heliconia and lotus from Las Amazonas here, and then on the right is some kind of orchid I can't quite pick, along with some more hummingbirds. Here's another hummingbird on the left and a cockatoo on the right, another condor. Unrelated to Colombia, but I noticed recently that this aircraft was a teaser to Disney Animation's next film, Strange World, which is kind of cool. Also just wanted to mention here that the track playing in this part of the credits is called La Cumbia de Mirabel, or Mirabel's Cumbia in English. You may already know, but cumbia is arguably the most famous traditional music genre to come out of Colombia. And finally, to end it all, we have a cute little capybara. And that's it. Every reference to Colombia that I and my Colombian friends were able to find in Encanto. I think you can see now, if you hadn't already, just how much thought went into this film from a cultural perspective. It's just so rich in its cultural details that you can analyze it purely from that perspective and still come away with so much. It's no wonder that it was a hit among Colombians. Honestly, if Disney did something like this for Australia, I think I'd be pretty chuffed as well. With all that said, I hope you learn a bit about Colombia with this video. There were obviously some real deep-cut cultural details that you might have otherwise known about. I know there was probably a lot of stuff I missed, particularly when it comes to plants and outfits, of which there was a ton. Still, hopefully this was reasonably comprehensive. It's certainly my longest video to date by a mile, and to that end, I salute you for making it all this way. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe and bell, as I make content about Colombia every week. But until next time, I'll see you around. Ciao!